Welcome to Audiorama on Delectora. Make yourself comfortable, listen, and enjoy this audiobook. Always look ahead. Prentice Mulford.
The tendency of many people, once they are a little advanced in years, is to look backwards and with regret. The look should be in the opposite direction, forward. If you want to go backwards in every way, mentally and physically, keep cultivating the state of mind of living in regret with your past life. One of the main characteristics of the material mind is to cling to the past with force. It likes to remember the past and to regret it. The material mind has an endless series of solemn amusements, remembering past joys and feeling sad that they will never return. But being real to the spirit, the past matters relatively little to it. He expects to be, a year from now, a different individual in thought than he is at present. He is willing to forget 1,000 years from now, who or what he is today, because he knows that this intense desire, to remind himself of what he has been, delays his advancement to greater power and greater pleasure. Why worry about what you were 1,000 or 5,000 years ago? Yet, back then, you were something far less than you are today. You may say that you are curious to know what you were. But, is it worth satisfying that curiosity, if to do so you must drag with you, in corpses, your deceased selves? Those lives have served their purpose for you. In doing that work, they have brought you possibly more pain than pleasure. Do you want to carry with you always the memory and the burden of that pain, especially when that burden brings you more suffering and deprives you of pleasure? It is like the bird that must insist to always carry with it the shell from which it was born. If you have a sad memory, throw it away. If you cannot get rid of it, ask the Supreme Power to help you do it, and that help will come. If you want to grow old, weaken, gray and wither, go at once to live in your past and regret your youth. Go and revisit the places and the houses where you lived 20, 30, 40 years ago. Call the dead, cry for them, live remembering the joys you had there, and say they are gone and have fled, and will never return. In doing so, you are holding the dead beings over you. If we were to come into another physical life, with the memory of the last one, we would come into the world physically, as miniature old men and women, decrepit and gray-haired. Physical youth is fresh and flourishing, because it does not carry with it any sad material memories of the past. A girl is beautiful, because her spirit has been detached from the past, and from the sad memory of her former life, and has, therefore, the opportunity to assert itself for a time. When a woman begins to age, she begins to burden herself with remorse about the past, and about the fact that she is no longer 20 years old. Your spirit demands for the body that uses grace, agility of movement and personal beauty, for it is made in the image of God, an infinite mind and life. Beauty, grace, and agility are the characteristics of that mind, in that phase of existence, which we call childhood. In youth, the spirit has the opportunity to assert its desire for beauty and agility, because it has not yet been loaded, false beliefs and regrets. The liveliness, agility, and tireless playfulness of children of 10 or 12 years, is due to the joy of the spirit, recovered from the burden carried in a past existence. That burden was of thoughts unprofitable to carry. You would have physically the agility you had at the age of 15, if you would shed the burden of sadness and belief in error, with which you have been carrying, during these past 20 or 30 years. With the help of the Supreme Power, you can begin the process of unloading now, saying, leave behind the memory of all that you loved in the past, all that you regretted, all that made you cry. God never regrets or regrets, and you, as a spirit, are made in His image. God is eternal life, joy, and serenity. The more of these characteristics you reflect, the closer you will be to the infinite spirit of good. You have buried your loved ones in the earth, and you do them no good, with your sad thoughts about them. You put a barrier between their spirit and yours, by thinking of them as lost. In doing so, you not only increase and foster in them a sad mental condition, but you bring their gloomy mental condition, upon yourself, as many do in bereavement. The greatest good we can do them, is to think of them as if they were alive, as ourselves, and to put out of our minds their graves, tombstones, coffins, and shrouds. If we cannot do it ourselves, let us ask the Supreme Power to help us do it. Often, we cause those who have lost their bodies to feel dead by thinking of them in this way. If we do this, they will return their thoughts of death to us. Don't go near cemeteries. Some may find me cold and insensitive in saying this, but the truth as it is presented to me, says that the cemetery, where your loved ones do not remain, is spiritually a very unhealthy place to visit. They are filled with thoughts of regret, death, and decay. When you visit them, you incorporate that thought into yourself. It is hostile and kills youth, vigor, elasticity, joy, and life. Our cemeteries are full of lies. We place a stone over the discarded body of a friend, and we put on that stone the word, dead. This is not true. Your friend is not dead, it is only the body he used that is there, but that grave is planted in your memory, and your friend in your mind. It rests there, regardless of our actions. Let us try to believe, in its existence in a perpetual extension of life, and in the impossibility of anything like death, in the vast universe. We cannot help but create for ourselves, when we think of that grave, or revisit it, an image of that friend as dead, and decomposing in his coffin. This image we fix in our mind, and in doing so, we fix in our mind the thought of darkness, death and decay. Thoughts of decay and death are things and forces. When we have them present, we add elements of decay to the body. We need, as far as possible, to fix our thought on life and on the increase of life, an existence greater in its activity than any other we have ever realized. That is not achieved by looking back, we must always look forward. Every regret, and every sad thought, takes a lot away from your life. It is a force used to accumulate more misery, it is a force used to strengthen the habit of regret. It is a force used to make the mind color everything with a tinge of sadness. And the longer you use the force in this way, the darker the die becomes. Furthermore, when we go back to the past, and live in it in preference to the present, we are bringing back the old moods and mental conditions that belong to that past. This feeling, which is constantly maintained, will cause some kind of physical ailment. The ailment belongs to a mental condition, which we should end forever. If we look to the future, we will get rid of it, and have better health. If the state of mind that predominates in our mind is that of looking backward, the end result will be very serious for the body. In business, dynamic and enterprising businessmen hardly allow themselves to be sad. If they did, their business would suffer. Their thinking is directed forward, and that thinking is the real force that drives their business. If they were to dwell on sad memories of the past, their business would regress. They work their success to the extent that they really succeed by this spiritual law, even if they don't know it very well. You may be saying, I have failed in life, I will always be a failure. This is because you are always going backwards, living in your failure, and therefore, bringing more failure upon you. Reverse this mental attitude, work in the other direction, and live in future success. Why do you always say you are sick? Because you are looking back, looking at your past ailments, and thus bringing more upon yourself. Sometimes I have heard the expression, when the earth was young, as if this planet is now in its maturity, and is going to fall into the sense of freshness. Although in reality, an increase in vitality, refinement and purity is brewing in all forms of life, whether human, animal or plant. This earth has never been as young as it is today. Youth is life growing and increasing in beauty and power. It is not the crudest beginning of life. The so-called barren rock contains elements, which will help to form the future tree and its flower. That part of the rock that goes into the tree and flower, increases or decreases in life, only becomes an expression of life, higher and more beautiful. So do we from age to age. The rock crumbles, in order to live in this higher form. The old mind must crumble and disappear to make room for the new, and make of us the new spiritual being. As the old mind crumbles, so will the old body. For spiritual change must be accompanied by physical change. But if you live in the understanding and spirit of this law, you need not lose a physical body, but have an ever-changing one. As you live in spiritual belief, the old life leaves, and the new enters with fullness. Nothing in nature or in the universe is stationary, nothing goes backwards. A gigantic, incomprehensible force and wisdom moves all things forward, toward greater, higher powers and possibilities. You are included in this force, and you are part of it. There is in you, in an embryonic state, the power to prevent the physical body that your spirit uses, from decaying. As well as the power to use it in such a way, that even today's fiction would dismiss as too wild, to be captured in the pages of a novel. For to spirit, youth and the constant growth of youth, is an eternal inheritance. If your body has aged, it is not a sign that your spirit has also aged. The spirit cannot age in the material sense, any more than the sunlight can age. Your body has aged because that body has become the material likeness and expression of a false self, or shell, that has formed over your spirit. That false self is made up of thoughts, prevalent from early physical age, and those thoughts are false thoughts. A big part of that thought is regret. Regret is an inverted force, a turning of the mind to look backward, when its natural and healthy state is to look forward, and live in the joys that are sure to come. When we look forward to the new life that is to come to our race, when we have learned to always look forward to the greater joys that are to come. And let us cease to look back, and to drag the dead past with us, men and women, will have much more beautiful and delicate bodies, than they possess at present. Because their bodies will be the image or reflection of their thoughts, and their thoughts will always be fixed on what is beautiful and symmetrical. They will know that what is to come, and what awaits them from the wealth of infinite mind, must exceed anything they have realized in the past. In the present age, the prevailing mentality of most people is directly contrary, because of the little faith they place in that power, which the theologian calls God. They are always in their mind, saying, "There are no future joys for us, like our past joys. Our youth has fled, our future on earth is dull and dreary, it is like dust and ashes." The truth that life does not end with the death of the body, progresses slowly, to fix itself firmly in our minds. The kind of life, which a man may be living here at the age of 70, does not end in the grave, it continues directly. The old man, as we call it here, wakes up on the other side of life, after losing his body as an old man. Still, if you are one of those old people, who has outlived his time and his generation, who clings to the physical past and reminisces nostalgically, who feels that age has limited his ability to learn, and believes that he has reached the end of his road, he will be exactly an old man, in the world of the spirit. There is no sudden transformation in youth, when a decrepit and worn body dies. Just as the tree falls, so it lies for a time, even in the hereafter. But it cannot remain forever in that state, it must grow into youth before it grows old. For that, it is necessary not only that he leaves the old body, but also the old material mind, which made that body. His spirit is detached from that mind, when he has a new body or is reincarnated, and is detached from it, because he loses the memory of all the sad memories, and regrets of the past. Man must always be a child, and the woman or girl can, as a man or woman, always be a boy or girl in his spirit, without being foolish, or lose true dignity. You can have all the joy of youth, with the wisdom of maturity, and to have a clear and powerful mind, you need not be an owl. It can be useful for us for a period, to go back to our most recent past lives, and live in them for a while. Sometimes we are temporarily pulled back to an old mental condition, to an old experience, in order to make us more alive than ever. The rags and tatters of mistaken beliefs that still cling to us can result from revisiting places and people from which we have been separated for a long time. During this visit, old associations, moods related to them, and possibly old habits, which we thought we had abandoned long ago, resume the power of their influence. For a time, we may be absorbed and enveloped by our past life, temporarily returning to an old mentality, which used to be ours constantly, in that place or association. But after a while, the new self, in which we have grown up during a long absence, opposes the old one. It experiences a deep aversion and disgust towards the narrowness of life, the false beliefs, and the purposeless existences that surround it, finding in them a palpable distaste. The spirit refuses to have anything to do with the old. A conflict then arises between our two minds, the old and the new, which may result in temporary physical illness. Our old life, or self, rises up as if out of its grave, and tries to attach itself to the new, and even rule it. The new self rejects the corpse with horror, but in thus seeing the corpse, it observes fragments of the old self which, unperceived, have been attaching themselves to the new one. We do not get rid of the error of belief at once, and we often retain unconsciously some parts of such a belief, when we imagine that we have completely rid ourselves of them. These parts are the remnants of old thoughts and former mental conditions. Once again, thus awakening, it rises up and pushes out what it finds in it of the old. This expulsion is accompanied by a physical disturbance, because your spirit puts all its strength in rejecting these fragments of the old self. As you could put all your physical strength in pushing a snake. Before the new thoughts that emerge can take full control, it is necessary to banish our old belief errors, allowing them to leave, and make way for the new. If your spirit was content, and blindly carried any scorpion of false belief, you would end up falling into the pit, as many are doing now. When you live several years in a certain house, town, or locality, you become a spiritual self, belonging to that locality. Every house, tree, road, or other object, which you have been in the habit of seeing there for a long time, has a part of that self, in thought attached to it. Every person who knows you there, has in his mind the self that you do there, and puts that self out, when he meets you or they talk about you. If before, in that place, you had the reputation of being weak, hesitant, impractical, or intemperate, and you go back to the people who knew you as such. Even if you have changed for the better, it is very likely, in the thought and memory that is held of you, this old self will be pushed back towards you. And as a result, you may feel very much like your old self, over a period of time. You return to that place, after a long absence. During that absence, you have radically changed your beliefs. You bring with you a different mind. You are, in reality, a different person. But the old you, the old me from years past, will come out of all the familiar objects to meet you. It will come out of the houses once inhabited by your friends, even if they are now occupied by strangers. You will find it in the village church, in the old school, on the very rails and fence posts, which were familiar to you long ago. And above all, it will come out of the memory of people, who only knew you for what you were 20 years ago. Each of those people reinforces with you this image, of your former self. You talk to them on the plane of that life, or inner self, for the moment you ignore yourself. Just as you think, if you believe now you put aside your new self, not wishing to impose on your friends' opinions, which for them may be unpleasant, or seem wild and visionary. You meet perhaps 25 or 30 people, who only know you as your old self, and with all of them you act with the old self, and repress the new one. This, for a while, makes the old dead self very strong. But you can't maintain this, you can't warm the old corpse of yourself to life. If you try to be and live your old self, you will become mentally depressed, and physically ill. You may find yourself in moods, which are typical of your old life, and which you thought were gone forever. Or you may find yourself plagued by a physical ailment, also typical of that period, which you had not suffered from for years. Those pains are not real, they are nothing more than the wrong thoughts and beliefs, which your old self is trying to fix. I recently visited a place, from which I had been absent 25 years. I had spent a part of my physical youth there, and had lived with a mind or belief, very different from the one I have now. I returned to find the place dead, in more ways than one. Most of my old acquaintances had passed away, and their remains were in cemeteries. But I noticed this death among my contemporaries, who claimed to be alive. They had lost the stimulus and activity of their youthful ambition. They had resigned themselves to growing old, lived in the past, talked about the good old days, and compared unfavorably the present and the future with the past. They had in mind where I had left them 25 years before, and where I was in mind when I left them. Drawn temporarily into their train of thought, for the sake of old acquaintances, I talked with them of the past, and for some days lived in it. At every step I found something animate or inanimate, which brought me back to the past life. Then I went to the cemeteries, and, by thought, renewed the knowledge of those, whose remains lay there. Thus I lived for days, without being aware, that in these moods of sad reminiscence, I was bringing to me elements of sadness, which belonged to decay. First I became very depressed, then I became strangely ill, and became so weak, that I could scarcely stand. I was continually in a nervous tremor, and full of vague fears. For, in returning to my past life, I had dragged back my old mental conditions, my old mind, my old self of that time. But since then I had grown a new mind, a new self. The new me that I had become, since I left that locality, did not accept the old, and was getting rid of it, or rather, was getting rid of it. This process of detachment was what caused my physical disorder. There was a conflict between these two forces, one trying to get in, and the other to keep it out. My body was the battlefield between the two. No battlefield is a serene place to live, when the confrontation is going on. In this case, it was necessary for me to look back, and live on my back for a while, to show me clearly the evil of doing so. Because no lesson can really be learned, without having lived through an experience. It was not only the evil of living backwards, in that particular locality, that I came to see clearly. I also saw for the first time, where I had been living unconsciously in the past, and heading backwards in countless ways. And therefore, unconsciously, expending the strength that would have pushed me forward, in every way. I also understood, after going through this process, why weeks before visiting that place, I had felt depressed, and experienced also a return of certain moods, which I had not felt in years. It was because my spirit was already in that place, and was working on this change. The climax was reached when my material being came to that place. All changes occur in the spirit, often before our material senses are aware of them. Let no one imagine that by writing about these spiritual laws, I am able to live fully in accordance with them. I am not above error or mistake, I fall into pits from time to time, get off the main path, and come back up. Power comes from looking forward with hope, from expecting and demanding the better things to come. That is the law of infinite mind, and when we follow it, we live in that mind. Nature, on earth, gets rid as quickly as possible of its dead, and then loses sight of them. However, it is better to say that nature transforms what is no longer useful to her, in other terms of life. The living tree produces a new leaf at each return of spring. It has nothing to do with the dead ones, it does not hoard withered rose leaves to attract a sad memory. When the tree itself stops producing leaves and flowers, it transforms, and enters into other forms of vegetation. I do not mean that we should try to banish all memories of the past. Banish only the sad part. Leave all you want from your past, and that has given you a healthy enjoyment. There are memories of scenes of forests, fields, rippling rain, blue skies and rippling waves of white foam. Among many other expressions of nature, related to your individual life, which can be remembered, with pleasure and profit. They do not belong to the decadent past, are full of life, freshness, and beauty, and are current. If, in spite of this, some tinge of sadness seeps in, reject it instantly. Refuse to accept it. It is not part of the joyful and life-giving memory, it is the cloud that, if you give it the slightest chance, will overshadow the whole, and turn everything into darkness. The science of happiness lies in controlling our thought, and getting it from healthy sources of life. When your mind is diverted from the possible habit of thinking and living on the gloomy side of things, and admitting the gloomy thought, you will find, to your surprise, that the very place the sight of which caused you pain, will now give you pleasure. Because you have banished a certain unwholesome mental condition, in which you used to indulge. You can revisit the localities connected with your past, remember and live, only in the bright and living part of that past, and reject all thought about sad changes, and those who have passed away never to return. This I have found out for myself. Is there any use or sense in admitting that things, which only hurt and harm you, have access to you? Does God commend any suicidal and self-destructive act? Grief does nothing but destroy the body. God is in the trees, or the infinite mind is in nature. You are fortunate and love the trees, especially the wild ones, which grow where the great creative force placed them, and which, therefore, are independent of man's care. For all things that we call wild or natural, are closer to the infinite mind, than those that have been enslaved, artificialized, and hindered by man. Being nearer to the infinite, they have in them, the more perfect infinite force and thought. That is why, when one finds himself in the midst of the wild and natural, in the forest or in the mountains, where all traces of the works of man have been left, you feel an indescribable exhilaration and freedom, which you do not perceive anywhere else. You breathe an element always released by the trees, rocks, birds and animals, and by every expression of the infinite mind around you. It is healthily stimulating. It is something more than air, it is the infinite force in mind, expressed by all these natural things, acting upon you. You cannot get this strength in the city, not even in the carefully cultivated garden, because there the plants and trees have too much of the lower mind of man. That mind which believes that it can improve the universe. Man thinks that the infinite made this world raw, and then left it completely for him to improve it. We are actually doing this by destroying the native forests, as well as the birds and animals that once inhabited them. Our rivers are loaded with filth from sewage and factories. And our ever-expanding cities and towns cover miles with piles of bricks and mortar, with their inhabitants crammed into ever smaller dwellings, which are surrounded by sewers underneath, and praying with noise and danger above. We improve in the divine and natural order of things. You are fortunate, when you grow to have a living, tender and sincere love for wild trees, animals and birds. And you recognize then, that they all come from and are built, with the same mind and spirit, as your own. And they are also capable of giving you something very valuable, in exchange for the love you give them. The wild tree is not indifferent, and can take into account such a love. That love is not a myth, nor a simple feeling, it is an element and a literal force, which goes from you to the tree. The spirit of the tree feels it. You represent a part and a belonging, of the infinite mind, and the tree represents another part and belonging, of that same infinite mind. It has its part of life, thought and intelligence. You have a much larger part, which must be even greater. Love is an element that, although it cannot be seen physically, is as real as air or water. It is a force that acts, lives, moves, and in that much larger world of life that surrounds us, of which the physical sense cannot be aware. It moves in the waves and currents, like those of the ocean. There is a sense in the tree that feels your love, and responds to it. It does not respond or show its pleasure in our way, or in any way that we can understand. Now its mechanism of acting, is the way of the infinite mind, of which it is a part. God's ways are inscrutable, and cannot be described. We cannot understand them, we can only discover them and live them, to the extent that they make us happier. There is for all in time, a serenity and a peace of mind, which surpasses all understanding, but this peace cannot be subjected to a chemical analysis, or to the operation of the dissecting room. As the Great Spirit has made all things, that omnipresent mind and wisdom are not found in all things. If we love the trees, the rocks and all things, as the Infinite made them, will they not in response to our love, give us each of their particular thoughts and wisdom? Will we not approach God through love, by these expressions of God, in the rocks and the trees, the birds and the animals? We hope to find God realizing the most every day, appreciating the mighty and immeasurably, and getting more and more of His power in us every day, just dwelling in the four-letter word, God. You may laugh at the idea, that a tree has a mind, that it is a thinking tree. But the tree has an organization like yours, in many ways. It has its sap, like your blood. It has a circulation, for the skin. It has its bark, it has for lungs its leaves. It needs to have its food. It is nourished by the earth, the air and the sun, and adapts to the circumstances. The oak that grows in exposed situations, is rooted more firmly in the ground, in order to withstand the storm. Pines that grow densely together, take few roots, as they depend on their number, to break the force of the wind. The sensitive plant retreats, at the approach of the hand of man. Many wild plants, like the indigenous ones, do not grow or thrive in artificial conditions. Yet, with all these physical resemblances, to those of your own body, you deny to the tree or plant, the participation of mind which gives it infinity. No, it is not possible. The tree is a part of the infinite mind, just like you. It is one of the many parts, of the thoughts of the omnipresent mind. We only see the part or form of that thought, which is expressed in the trunk, the root, the branch and the leaf. Just as with ourselves. We only see our physical bodies, we do not see our spiritual part, just as with the tree. The tree is literally one of God's thoughts. That thought deserves our study, because it contains a wisdom, which we have not yet reached. We want that wisdom, we want to make it part of ourselves. We want it because true wisdom or truth brings us power. We want power to give us better bodies, healthier and healthier bodies. We want to be completely free of disease. We want lighter hearts, and happier minds. We want a new life and a new pleasure to live each day. We want our bodies to become lighter, and not heavier as the years go by. We want a religion that gives us certainty, instead of hopes and theories. We want a deity, in which it is impossible to doubt. We want to feel the infinite mind, in every atom of our being. We want to feel every day a new pleasure of living, and starting where we left off yesterday, find something new, in what yesterday seemed old and worn out. When we enter into the domain of the infinite mind, and draw more and more of that mind to us, and make it a part of us, nothing can seem flat, stale and unprofitable. We want powers now denied to the mortal. We want to be above the mortal body, above pains and death. Can the trees give us all this? Is it possible for them to help us to do so? When we enter into their spirit, when we recognize and realize more and more, the reality of that part of the infinite which they express, and when we can stop seeing them as inanimate creatures. If you consider trees as something fit only for wood and firewood, you get very little life from them. They feel towards you, as you would feel towards a person, who considered you a mindless, meaningless thing, and fit only to be sawn into lumber or firewood. When we come to really love God, or the infinite spirit of good, we will also love every part of God. A tree is a part of God. When we come to send our love to Him, He will send it back to us. And that love, that literal mind and element, coming from the tree to us, will enter into our beings, add to them, and give us its knowledge and its power. They will tell us that the mind, and the force it represents from the infinite, has far better uses for man, than being turned into fuel or wood. Their love will tell us that the forests, which pierce the air with their billions of branches, twigs, and leaves, are literal conductors of a literal element, which they bring to the earth. This element gives life to man, in proportion to his capacity to receive it. The closer we come to the conception of infinite mind, we see more clearly that this mind permeates all things. And we feel closer our relationship with the tree or the bird, as if they were similar creatures. And so, we can absorb more of the vitalizing element, which all these expressions of mind give. The person who regards trees as something that serves only as fuel and wood can get very little of this element, which to the finer mind is an elixir of life. The mind that sees in the tree, in the bird, in the animal, in the fish or in the insect, only a thing devoid of intelligence, and fit only to destroy or enslave for fun. It is a mind, which rejects from them all a spirit or element which, if it were recognized, would be received or absorbed. And if it were absorbed, it would bring new life and immense power, to the mind and body. We obtain the element of love only to the extent that we have it in us. We can only extract this element of supreme power. We extract it to the extent that we admire every expression of the infinite, whether that expression be a bush, an insect, a bird, or other form of nature. We cannot destroy or mutilate what we truly love. The more we truly love these things, the more their element of love flows into us. That element is as real a life for us as the tree itself. The more of that life we receive and absorb, the more we realize a power in life that can only be expressed as miraculous. If we destroy the forests, we temporarily decrease the amount of this element they give. If we replace wild trees with exotic or cultivated varieties, that element is adulterated, and the vigor it can give diminishes. If we cover the whole earth with cities, towns, villages and cultivated fields, we interfere with the supply of the vital element, which only forests can provide, in their natural state. Let us keep ourselves open to the recognition of the tree, as part of the infinite spirit, and we will be alive and able to absorb from the infinite spirit working through the tree. Trees give an element of life as necessary to man as the air he breathes. The works of man, as soon as they are finished, give off dust and misery. In our big cities, we take in dust with every breath. Nothing in this universe is still, or at absolute rest. Our miles of stone, brick and mortar are always in motion, grinding slowly and imperceptibly, until they become an impalpable dust. Cloth, leather, iron, and all materials used by man, are turning to dust. Observe the dust that in a single day, accumulates in your room, on the shelf and on the table, or on fine clothes, even when you do not open the windows. A gigantic force always in motion, is at work there, and carrying everything away in pieces. Let a ray of sunshine enter through the slit of a blind, and you will see countless specks floating in it. Think of all that, all those particles too tiny, to classify even as atoms, that you can't see. All this is a second-hand element, which is breathed and absorbed, both in the body and in the spirit. But trees and all natural things send out an element full of life. Our bodies also throw through the skin matter that can no longer use. In the big city, thousands and thousands of bodies throw out disused elements, too fine to classify them as dust. We breathe it again and again. This invisible cloud of matter, which permeates the crowded cities, does not sustain life. It has a certain life, like all things, but it is not fit for the growing life of man. When we get eternal life, health and happiness without palliation, our mind will completely change its attitude towards the tree, the bird, the animal, and everything in nature. We will realize that when we love all these expressions of the infinite mind, trees, plants, and animals, and leave them completely alone, they will send us in love, their part and quality of the infinite. It will flow to us, a new life and the source of an existence, with greater power and happiness than the present one. But how will we live? Do you believe that there is any other life or form of life than the one we now live in? Do you believe that in the exalted and refined mental condition we call heaven, there will be the killing of animals, the mutilation of trees, and the destruction of any material expression of supreme wisdom? Do you think we can reach that state of mind, higher and happier, without knowing the laws by which alone we can reach it? It is the same as expecting to sail a ship around the world, without knowledge of seamanship or navigation. We shall be drifting towards heaven, in the same way, as a barrel rolls downhill. We cannot immediately stop, from enslaving or slaughtering trees, birds or animals, nor from eating foods of animal origin, as long as the body craves and tastes such foods. It must have them. When the body is changed, by our spirit and belief, to finer elements, the stomach and palate will reject meat of any kind. They will not endure the taste nor the smell of sacrificed creatures. When the spirit resolves these matters, it does so definitively and forever. In the past, the human being made the mistake of trying to spiritualize or alter at will, higher and more subtle circumstances. For this he has imposed on himself and others, fasts and penances, and abstinence from the pleasures, which his nature craved. By such methods, he has never saved himself from disease, decay, or physical death. He has never regenerated or renewed his organism. By that method, he has lost his body eventually, just as the glutton and the drunkard lost theirs. The ascetic has not relied on the Supreme to raise him up in the scale of being, but on himself, and on his own effort. This is one of the greatest sins, because it temporarily separates such a person from the Supreme, and from the life that the Supreme will send, when trusted in him. There is no way out of any sin, any excess, any harmful habit, but through a total dependence upon the supreme power, to remove the gnawing, the craving, the peculiar desire of that habit. Otherwise, man may appear to reform outwardly, but he will never reform inwardly. Repression is not reform. The fanatic of all ages and creeds has been the person who believes that he can make himself an angel. Such a belief causes man to stop in his tracks. The Supreme is always saying, "Come to me, demand from me, seek me in all created things, and then I will send you always new thoughts, new things, new ideas and new elements. Elements that will change your tastes and appetites, that will gradually eliminate the coarseness, the fierce, insatiable and lawless desire, and the hurricane of passion. And they will bring you pleasures, which you cannot now realize. In time, we shall see more clearly, that when we consign the higher, finer, more enduring life to which all must attain, we will have the greatest possible incentive, with which to give the trees, the plants, the birds, the animals and all other expressions of the infinite, their life and their fullest freedom. We will be forced to love all that we really love. We cannot abuse, kill or enslave. We cage a bird for our own pleasure, we do not cage the bird for its pleasure. That is not the highest love for the bird. The highest love for all things is for us a source of life. As soon as there are more things in the world of nature, to which we can give the highest love, we can get in return more of its natural love and life. Thus, as we grow, refine and increase that power to recognize and love the bird, the animal, the insect, in other words, the infinite in all things, we will receive love, renewed life, strength, vigor, joy and inspiration. Not only from these, but also from the falling snowflake, from the pouring rain, from the cloud, from the sea or from the mountain. And this will not be a simple feeling, but a great means, to recover and strengthen the body. Because this strengthens the spirit, with strength that comes to stay, and what strengthens the spirit, must strengthen the body. We cannot make of ourselves, this ability to love and draw strength from all things. It belongs to us, but it must be demanded. It is natural to ask, why did the Supreme Power not infuse this higher love in us from the beginning? Why has this power long allowed man to continue to slaughter and spoil nature? Why are storms, earthquakes, wars and so many things in the forces of nature, and the forces of man, allowed to continue and cause so much catastrophe and misery? We do not undertake to answer for infinite wisdom. It is enough to know that there is a way, which leads away from all that we call evil. It is enough for us to know that the time will come when, as new beings with changed minds, we will absolutely forget that such evils ever existed. We will see in the forces of nature, whether fire or storm or anything else, only what is good, and what can bring us happiness. We must not always be the matter, which can be harmed by fire, or by tempest. The fiery furnace did not affect the 3 Jewish children who went through it, nor was the tempest a drawback to the Christ of Judea, when he walked on the waters. What history has shown to be possible for some, is possible for all. Communion with nature is something much more than a feeling, it is a literal union with the infinite. The element received in such a union, and which acts on the mind and body, is real, like anything we see or feel. The capacity to unite us with God, through his expressions in the cloud, the tree, the mountain, the sea, and the animal, is not possessed by all on the same level. These are literally outside their element or stream of thought. They can only live in comfort, in the bustle of the city, or in the chatter of the home. They can only find life in an artificial environment. Their spirits are covered with a parasitic growth of artificiality, which separates them from any sense of the expressions of God, in the solitude of nature. So they feel lonely in the forest, nature seems to them wild and gloomy. He who is able to withdraw into the solitude of nature, and enjoy that environment without feeling any loneliness, but a joyful sense of exhilaration, will return among men, with a greater and renewed power. Because he or she has literally walked with God, or with the infinite spirit of good. The seer, the prophet, and the miracle workers of biblical history, obtained their power in this way. The Christ of Judea retired to the mountains, in order to be strengthened by the infinite. The Oriental and the Indian, through whom higher powers have been expressed, loved the solitudes of nature. They could live in them with pleasure, they could meditate by the rock, the stream or the ocean for hours, almost unconscious of the immediate surroundings. Because their spirits had moved away from their bodies, and were absorbing dreamy, new ideas of the infinite. Rarely, you will find a person who, as a ruler, soldier, inventor, discoverer, poet or writer, has left his mark on the race, without having loved the communion where God is more facilment. Their inspiration is born. The poet cannot sing of the city laid out at right angles, with the sewer below and the elevated highway above. Just as he can do it, when escaping to the mountain wrapped, like the oath, in its misty shroud. We cannot train this capacity, in order to enjoy the natural things of the earth, nor to draw strength from them. To claim to possess a virtue that does not belong to us is to act artificially, exaggeratedly and sentimentally naive. However, by constantly demanding from the infinite, a renewed mind, able to find and experience God, in the forest or in the sea, in the storm and in the tempest, and not only to feel security, but to absorb power and strength, when the forces of nature seem to be in their most furious state, that mind with such a capacity will gradually replace the old one. With the new mind, all things will be revitalized. Some laws of health and beauty, your thoughts shape your face, and give it its peculiar expression. Your thoughts determine the attitude, the bearing and the shape of your body. The law for beauty and for perfect health is the same, and both depend entirely on the state of your mind, or in other words, on the kind of thoughts you most use and receive. Ugliness of expression comes from unconscious transgressions of a law, whether in the young or in the old. Decay or weakness in a human body, as well as personal appearance that is repulsive, is a reflection of the predominant mood of that person. Nature sows in us that which some call instinct, what we call the higher reason, as it comes from the exercise of a set of finer senses than our external or physical senses. And this is so that we do not like everything that is repulsive or deformed, or that shows signs of decay. That is the innate tendency in human nature, to shun the imperfect, and to seek and like the relatively perfect. Your higher reason does not make much sense in despising wrinkles or decrepitude, or any form or sign of decay in the body. It is somewhat akin to the act of despising a dirty or torn garment. Your body is the real clothing. The same instinct, higher reason, that makes you like the well-shaped and beautiful body, or you are attracted to a new and tasteful suit. You and previous generations, age after age, have been told that it was an inevitable necessity, that it was the law and order of nature, for all times and all ages. That after a certain period of life, your body must wither and become unattractive, and that even the mind must fail, with the argument of the years. You have been told that your mind had no power to repair and recover your body, to make it again, newer and fresher continually. It is no more, in the inevitable order of nature, the fact that human bodies deteriorate, like the bodies of peoples, which have deteriorated in the past. Or the fact that man travels alone by stagecoach, as he did 70 years ago, or that messages can be sent only by letter, as 50 years ago, before the use of the electric telegraph. Or that your portraits can only be created by the painter's brush, as they used to be 50 years ago. Before discovering that the sun has the ability to capture a genuine image of oneself on a specially prepared sensitive surface. It is the impertinence of a dense ignorance, that any of us say what there is or what there will be, in the order of nature. It is a stupid mistake, to look at what little we know of the past, and say that it is the infallible index finger, which tells us what we'll do in the future. If this planet has had the characteristics that geology has assigned to it in the past, a flat planet of more rudimentary, crude and violent forces, then now that it abounds in forms of plant, animal, and even human life and organization more crude than now, of which its present condition is a refinement and improvement. Is not this the suggestion, the manifesto, the proof of a still greater refinement and improvement for the future? A refinement and improvement, which are taking place now. Does not refinement imply greater power, as the greater power of crude iron translates into steel? And are not these greater, and as yet almost unrecognized powers, which are to arise from the highest and most complex form of known organization, man? All the powers of man are known, internally and in secret. Among the thousands of thinkers of this and other lands, these and many other questions are asked now. Why do we have to wither, decay so much and lose the best that is worth living, just when we have gained that experience and wisdom, which best serves us to live? The voice of the people is always at first a whispered voice. The prayer, the demand or desire of the masses, is always at first a prayer, a desire or a secret longing, which a man at first hardly dares to whisper to his neighbor, for fear of making a fool of himself. But it is a law of nature, that every demand, whether silent or spoken, brings a supply of the thing desired, in proportion to the intensity of the desire, and the number of those who desire. Who, by the action of their minds on some subject, set in motion that silent force of thought, which has not yet been heard, in the schools of philosophy of the world. Millions of people silently desired the means of traveling, and sending intelligence more rapidly, and this brought the steam and the electric telegraph. But soon it will be necessary to answer other questions and demands, questions that always come silently from the multitudes. In attempting to answer these questions, and in seeking initially to carry out and test answers and methods, in order to achieve or realize many things, which were considered impossible or visionary, it is inevitable to encounter mistakes, stupidities, blunders, foolishness, setbacks and failures. In fact, it is similar to the 10 crashes on the railroads, and the 10 explosions, in the ancient era of the use of steam, compared to the present era. It is a natural process on the road to progress, where ridicule may appear along the way. But a truth always goes on, despite the mistakes and blunders, and this is demonstrated in the end. There are two kinds of age, the age of your body, and the age of your mind. Your body, in a sense, is nothing but a growth, a current construction that will be updated. Now your mind is another growth, or construction of millions of years. It has used many bodies in its growth, it has grown from a small state, to its present condition of power and capabilities, in the use of these bodies. In using them, you have been much rougher and rougher, than you are now. You have lived, as you could not live at all at present, and in forms of life or expression, very different from the form you use now. And every new body you have used, has been a new suit for your mind. And what you call death, is only the wearing out of this suit, through ignorance of the means, not so much of keeping it in repair, as of continually building it up, into ever more renewed freshness and vitality. You are not relatively young, your present youth means that your body is young. The older your spirit is, the better you can preserve the youth, vigor and elasticity of your body. Because the older your mind is, the more power it has gathered from its many existences. You can use that power for the preservation of beauty, of health, of vigor, of everything that can make you attractive to others. You can also use unconsciously, the same power to make you ugly, unhealthy, weak, sick and unattractive. To the extent that you use this power, in any of these directions, you will be uglier or more beautiful, healthier or unhealthier, more attractive or unattractive. That is, as to unattractiveness, for this existence ultimately, if not in this, in some other existence. It must be symmetrical, because the evolution of the mind, from which our bodies evolve, from coarser to higher forms, is but a crude counterpart. It is always towards the higher, towards the finer, better and happier. That power is your thought. Every thought of yours is a very real thing, even if you cannot see it with the physical eye, or with the outer eye, as if it were a tree, a flower, or a fruit. Your thoughts are continually molding your muscles, in form and manner of movement, according to their character. If your thought is always determined and resolute, your step in walking will be resolute. If your thought is permanently determined, your whole bearing, your conduct and your direction will show that. If you say something, you mean it. If your thoughts are undecided at all times, you will have a gesture, a direction, a bearing or a way of using your body, which will always be undecided. And this, when prolonged, will make the body deformed. Anyway, exactly like when you write in a hurry, in that situation your hurried thinking makes deformed letters, and sometimes, also deformed ideas. While your state of mind or calm thinking makes well-formed letters and elegant curves, as well as developed and fine ideas. Every day, you are thinking about yourself, in the midst of some phase of character and facial expression, whether good or bad. If your thoughts are permanently cheerful, your face will show joy. If most of the time, you are in a discontented mood, moody and irascible, this kind of thinking will draw unpleasant features on your face. They will poison your blood, make you dyspepsia and ruin your complexion, because you find yourself in your own invisible mental laboratory, generating a poisonous element. And as you draw it out, you just think, due to the inevitable law of nature, you attract the same kind of thought element from others. If you think or open your mind to the mood of despondency or irritability, you attract more or less the same element from all the despondent or irritable men or women in your town or city. So, you are charging your magnet, your mind, with its current of electric thought, of destructive tendency. And the law and property of thought connects with the other currents of thought of despondency or irritability, with your mental battery, your mind. If we think of murder or robbery, we put ourselves by this law in spiritual relationship with all the thieves and murderers of the world. Tementi can make your body sick or recover, make it strong or weak, according to the thought it emits, and the action upon it of the thought of others. Shout fire in a crowded theater, and dozens of people will become trembling, weak, and paralyzed with fear. It is a false alarm, though only the thought of fire, it was a horror acting on the body, which took away the strength. The thought or mood of fear has in some cases acted on the body, to the point of making the very hair turn white, in just a few hours. The thought angry, moody, worried or irritable, adversely affects digestion. A sudden mental shock can cause you to lose all appetite for a meal, or the stomach to reject that food when you eat. The damage done to the body suddenly, in relatively few cases, by fear or other malignant state of mind, produces a more gradual damage in millions of bodies, all over the planet. Dyspepsia does not come so much from the food we eat, as from the thoughts we have, while we eat it. We can eat the healthiest bread in the world, but if we eat it with a sour temperament, we will put acidity in our blood, and in our stomachs, and therefore, also in our faces. If we eat with an anxious mood, and we worry all the time, about how much we should eat or not, and whether it can hurt us, then, we are consuming elements of anxious, worried and restless thoughts with our food, and these will poison us. If we are cheerful, talkative, lively and jovial while eating, we are placing liveliness and joy in ourselves, and making such qualities part of us. If our family group eats in silence, or comes to the table with a kind of forced and resigned air, as if each one says to himself, "Well, all this must be gone over," and the head of the family buries himself in his business concerns, or in his newspaper and reads all the murders, suicides and robberies of the last 24 hours, and the queen of the house buries herself in aggressive resignation, or domestic worries, then you are consuming all of that at that table, along with the food. It is ingesting the thought element of worry, murder, suicidality and the morbid element, which loves to dwell on the horrible and the gruesome. As a result, dyspepsia, in one of its many forms, will be manufactured all the way, from one end of the table to the other. If the habitual expression of a face is a frown, it is because the thoughts behind it belong, for the most part, to an unfriendly attitude. If the corners of the mouth are crooked, it is because the thoughts that govern, and shape that mouth, are gloomy and dejected. If a face is not inviting to people, and makes them wish to meet its wearer, it is because that face is a sign that announces thoughts behind it, which the wearer does not dare to tell others. And that possibly, he dare not whisper to himself. The continuous mood of haste, that is, to be with the mind or spirit in a certain place, long before the body is there, will make the shoulders lean forward. In such a state of mind, you literally send the thought, your spirit, your true self, though invisible, to the place towards which your power, your thought, is dragging your body. This causes it to take the form that thought desires. An autonomous man is never in a hurry, and holds or contains his thought, his spirit or his power, mainly in the act or use he is making in the present moment, with the instrument his spirit uses, his body. And a woman habitually autonomous, will be graceful in every movement, for the reason that her spirit has complete possession and mastery of her tool, the body. And she is not 1 or 10 miles away, from that body in thought and worrying, hurrying or dwelling on something, at that distance from her body. When we form a plan for any business, invention or enterprise, we are making that invisible element, our thought, as real, though invisible, as any iron or wooden machine. That plan thought begins as soon as it is made, attracting to itself more invisible elements, the power to be carried out, to materialize into substance, physical or invisible. When we fear misfortune, or live in fear of any evil, or expect bad luck, we also make a construction of invisible element, thought. That by the same law of attraction, attracts forces or elements, destructive and harmful to you. In this way, the law for success, is also the law for misfortune. Depending on how it is used, just as the strength of a man's arm, it is capable of saving another from drowning, or stabbing him in the heart. Whatever possible thing we think, we are creating an invisible substance, a construction that will attract to us forces or elements, which will help or harm us. All depending on the character of the thought we think or put. If you expect to grow old, and you always keep your mind in an image or construction of yourself as old and decrepit, you will surely be like that. In this way, you are molding yourself in this aspect. If you make a plan in thought, in the invisible element as helpless and decrepit, that plan will attract to you, from the invisible element of thought, all that will make you weak, helpless, and decrepit. If on the other hand, you make a plan to be always healthy, active, and vigorous, and you stick to that plan, and you refuse to grow old and to believe in the legions of people, who will tell you that you must grow old, you will not grow old. The fact that you think it must be so, as people tell you, is what does it. If you always build in your mind an ideal of yourself, as someone strong, healthy and vigorous, you are building for yourself, from the invisible element, which is always bringing more health, strength and vigor. You can make your mind a magnet, to bring health or weakness. If you like to think of the strong things in nature, granite mountains, churning waves and sturdy storms, attract their elements of strength. If today you build yourself up in health and strength, and tomorrow you resign yourself and cease to think or build, you do not destroy what in spirit you have built up. That amount of element added to your spirit can never be lost, but for the moment, by getting down, that is, by thinking about weakness, you stop building your health structure. And although your spirit is much stronger by that addition of element, it cannot be strong enough to give to the body what it may feel that it has been taken away from it, through that dejected thought. The persistence of thinking about health, in imagining or idealizing yourself as healthy, vigorous and symmetrical, is the cornerstone of health and beauty. What you think about the most, what you will be the most and what you will have the most. You say, no, but your bedridden patient is not thinking, I am strong, he or she is thinking, I am very weak. Your man or woman with dyspepsia is not thinking, I will have a strong stomach, they are always saying, I can't digest anything, and they can't for that very reason. We are prone to take care of our ailments, rather than taking care of ourselves. We want our ills to be cherished and sympathized with. When we have a cold, our own cough says to others unconsciously, this morning I am an object for their sympathy, I am so afflicted with a cold. So, ask for sympathy. If the body were properly treated, your own mind, and all the minds around you, would say to that weak element in you, get out of that body. And the silent force of a few minds thus directed, would expel that weakness, and it would go away as Satan did. When the man of Nazareth was imperiously commanded, colds, and all other forms of disease, are but forms of Satan, and they thrive also on lack of vigor and health. They spread like measles. There would remain many adult persons who, in one or two of their limbs, would retain the agility and elasticity of a 12-year-old child. They would be individuals capable of climbing trees, walking on rails, and running simply because they enjoy doing so, and cannot help it. If they could be manufactured and sold, limbs so full of life, there would be no demand for them on the part of those stout ladies and gentlemen, who get in and out of their carriages, as if their bodies weighed a ton. Why does mankind resign itself with hardly a protest to the increasing heaviness, laziness and stiffness, which comes even with middle age? However, I think we compromise with this inertia, and call it dignity. Of course, a man, a father, a citizen, a voter and a pillar of the state of inertia, should not run, cut and kick like a child, because he cannot. Nor should a lady who has grown to have dignity, run like she did when she was a 12-year-old girl, because she can't either. In reality, we put on our ailments as if they were masks, and we settle for them, saying the following, this is what has to be done, because we can do nothing else. Sometimes, we even rush to put them on, like the young gentleman who sticks a spectacle on his eye, and thereby ruins the vision of a healthy organ. There are more possibilities in nature, in the elements and in man, and outside of man, and they come as fast as man sees and knows how to use these forces, in nature and in himself. Possibilities and miracles mean the same thing. The telephone, which suddenly appeared in our time 200 years ago, would have been a miracle, and could have consigned the person who used it to prison or to the stake. All unusual manifestations of the powers of nature were then attributed to witchcraft. Because people in that period were so afraid of them that they could not accept the fact that the universe was capable of showing higher expressions of higher mind for the comfort and pleasure of man.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through the illuminating words of Prentice Mulford. May his wisdom continue to resonate with you, guiding your steps as you forge ahead on your path. Remember, the power to shape your destiny lies within you. Keep looking ahead with courage, determination, and an unwavering belief in your potential. Farewell, and may your journey be filled with joy, growth, and countless blessings.